Hey everybody, welcome back to Grumpy Acres. I hope you're having a great week. Well, it's time to do the second step in the process of making our wine. I've got the wine right back here. We let it set for 10 days. Actually, we let it set for 13 days because I was trying to dig out my supplies and I could not find some of the stuff that I needed. So I had to wait because I had to run to a brew shop place and get some supplies that I needed. So, got an extra 3 days. The recipe called for 10 days. Did not hurt it. So, like I said, we've got it back here, and I can tell that some natural fermentation has already started taking place. It's got that tanginess that you smell whenever you start getting fermenting fruit, which is good. It's okay. That won't hurt it. That's actually probably going to enhance the flavor a little bit. And I started once or twice a day, like it said. Actually, what I did was I just shook the container. It just does it just as good, aerates it a little bit. And so now we're ready to do our first filtering. So what we need to do is we need to take this bucket and we need to filter out all the big chunks of everything. And to do that, what we've got here, we're going to do it in 2 steps. We've got a big fruit funnel and a big pot, and then I've got a coffee filter and a funnel and a 1-gallon jug. So this step of the process calls for us to strain out all the particulate, get it into a jug, and put some yeast into it, and cap it, and then it sits for 3 months and ferments. So let's get started doing that. The inside of this jug is extremely sticky. So we're going to pour this through. And like I said, this is going to get out most of the big chunks. I'll probably freeze this, freeze the particulate out and figure out what to do with it later. And it's actually got a pretty decent smell. You can smell that fermentation. Hang on a second, I'll be right back. You can smell that fermentation, but that's normal whenever you're making wine. Honestly, what we're doing is we're letting the fruit rot in a controlled manner. And but it's working well. This strainer, this is one of those strainers. It's got a little piece right here, and you put your fruit in it and you mash it down. I'm not going to do that because ours is already. Actually, you know what? I am. Hang on. Let's get all those juices out. Nope, that's not working very well. I'm gonna wash that off and go back to what I was doing. All right, let's pour the rest of this in there. Now, quite honestly, it doesn't look very appetizing, but we've got all those natural sugars that came out. Like I said, it started fermenting naturally on its own. One of the things we want to do when we're going through this winemaking process is we want to make sure that all our equipment is really clean. I've actually got some special sanitizer that I normally use. Like I said, I couldn't find all my stuff, so I just did it the best I could. And even if you use a store-bought sanitizer and you do a really good job, even stuff floating around in the air will get in there, and there's natural yeast floating in the air that will start the fermentation process too. The key is to minimize that as much as possible. You know, and I was thinking about it though. You know, it's when I was talking to the gentleman that owns the brew shop that I went to, Lawrence Brewing Supply, Lawrence, Kansas. If you guys, they've got a website. Go check them out if you're in the area. He's a really nice guy, and he's willing. I didn't even get his name. I apologize, but he's a really nice guy, and he's willing to talk to you. We discussed what I was doing, and he gave me some pretty good feedback on it. But the thing we talked about was that you know, they did not have all the modern stuff that we had. To sanitize their equipment, they had to boil it. They couldn't throw a sanitization pill in a tub and rinse it like that. They had to boil their stuff. And then they didn't have all the modern stuff like we've got. You know, we've got plastic, or what is that? We've got rubber utensils that don't get a lot of bacteria in them. We've got modern glass that is constructed way better. We've got stainless steel versus copper or iron. So, you know, they did that, and this recipe reflects that. This recipe is literally a little paragraph, probably about 20 lines long, and it discusses the entire winemaking process. Where I've got wine recipes that are 2 or 3 pages long, and I've got a 3-ring binder that I keep all my recipes and stuff in for my beer and my wine and my distilling. But you know, so they much simpler time, and like I said before when I was doing this, you know, I'm trying to figure out how to do this kind of stuff in austere settings. It's just kind of a throwback to my prepper years, where I want to learn how to do all this stuff without the conveniences of modern society. And it's been a very interesting trip, you know. And we also talked about yeast, because the recipe said just add yeast. And quite frankly, I wasn't really quite sure what they were talking about. And so they had different strains of yeast back then, but it wasn't like it was now. Where is it? So the yeast I'm going to use now is this Lalvin 71B, and it's just a special yeast strain. But the modern vintner has literally hundreds of different strains of yeast that they can use for different effects. You know, and then they've got all kinds of chemicals. We've got stuff that what is it? Potassium sorbate, which will kill off all the fermentation whenever you're ready to bottle it. And they've got stuff called sparkaloids that will clear out the sediment and make the wine much more clear. You know, instead of having that cloudy cider look, you'll have a nice, crisp, clear wine. But they didn't have all that stuff. And so I started thinking about it. I was like, okay, if I'm making this and I don't have access to a store to go buy my wine and everything, what do I do? Well, you can always use bread yeast. That's probably the most commonly found type of yeast, and it's the one that everybody knows. You get it in a little packet, or you can get it in a little metal or a little glass jar. Or we buy ours. We buy Red Star in 1 pound freeze-dried blocks, and they're like this big, and we usually keep 2 or 3 of them on hand. That's a throwback to when we were making all our bread at home. But you could probably use that. The issue with using bread yeast is it has a problem surviving at higher alcohol content. So once and I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, once your alcohol content gets up around 5%, it's going to start killing off the yeast. Like this 71B strain that I'm using, I've made wine with it, and I've got it all the way up to 17%, which is pretty darn strong for a wine. You know, so it's a much more hardy strain. But you know, if you have to, if you've got to use bread yeast and that's all you've got, and you want to do something like this, then by all means use it. Just understand you're going to get a different product. You're going to get a different product with it than if you're using a specific strain for making wine. Okay, this has strained out as good as I think it's going to get. Put this in the sink. Pardon the mess back here. Angela had a very late night last night canning. She did. We smoked fish yesterday again, and she ended up, I think she told me 3 pounds of shrimp and 11 pounds of salmon, flounder, and tuna steaks. And quite honestly, that 3 pounds of shrimp was probably more like 2 pounds of shrimp, because her and I were snacking on it after we smoked it. It tasted so good. It's probably some of the best shrimp I've ever had. But, okay, so we've done our initial straining, and here, let me show you. As you can see, it's got foam on it, and it's very cloudy. You can't see through it very well. And the next step is we're going to put it into that glass jar using that funnel. Before we put that into the jar, like I told you we were going to do, I need to add the yeast to this pot. Now, what I did was I took and opened up that yeast package, and I put some warm water in this bowl, and I put about a quarter of that package in here, because that package is for 5 gallons, and I don't want that much, because you can run into problems if you put too much yeast into it. Put the yeast in here, and I let it set. It set the whole time we were talking. And so I'm just going to pour it in here and give it a stir and get it spread around. Now what that yeast will do is that yeast will start eating the natural sugars in here. And the byproduct of that process is carbon dioxide and alcohol. And the yeast will start replicating, and the colony will grow, and it'll turn all the natural sugars into this solution into alcohol and carbon dioxide. And once it starts doing that, we'll start seeing, I've got this is called an airlock. This is called an airlock. And what we do is we put water in here, and we put it on top of that jug, and as that carbon dioxide comes out, it comes up, and it's just a little bell siphon. It comes up, and it'll start bubbling out, and that'll release the pressure. If we don't do that, you heard stories about beer bottles exploding and fermented veggie jars exploding. What's happened is that the carbon dioxide's built up to a point that it just causes the jar to pop or the lid to come off. And I've had some beer bottles do that before. And I had a water lock that actually was plugged up. I didn't clean it good enough, and I didn't realize it was locked up. And it popped off the top of a 5-gallon bucket one time. So that's what we're doing. Like I said, this is going to take a while for me to get it in there and strain it properly. So I'm going to turn it off, and I'll be back in a minute. All right, we are back. That took entirely too long. So what I ended up doing was I took the filters out, I let it sit for about 5 minutes, let some of the heavier particulate settle out, and I very gently poured the liquid into this bottle. There's still sediment in here. What we'll do is, this is going to sit for 3 months, so a lot of that stuff will settle out by itself. We're not supposed to stir this, we're not supposed to shake it. Normally with like a red wine or a white wine, what you would do is you would do a process called degassing, where you're agitating the liquid and trying to get all the oxygen bubbles out of it, because what will happen is those oxygen bubbles will cause the wine to oxidize, and it'll change the flavor, and it'll change the color on it. With this, it didn't say anything about doing that, so we're not going to do it. We're just going to do it exactly like the recipe says. As far as the sediment and all the particulate that's in here, we'll address that here in 3 months whenever we pull this out and decant it and put it into bottles. Okay, so we'll deal with that. There are some methods that we can do to clarify the wine. And so we'll do that in 3 months' time. Well, that's it. That's the second step in making this wine. Remember, some of the things that we discussed. We want to sanitize our equipment properly. We don't want to introduce any outside yeast or bacteria in here to potentially ruin the wine. We want to be cognizant in an austere setting that we're not going to have the conveniences of modern winemaking, and so we're going to have to learn how to do it the way they used to do it back in the 18th century, 17th century, and such. So there's different methods. The final step that we have to do, we've got our water lock. Put about that much water in it. Yep. Put the bell inside of it. This cap that I bought was the wrong size. So I've got a jug over there that it fits. So I've got a cap for that I can do a water lock on. So what I did was I took the original cap from this jug, just punched a hole in it, snugged that down in there, and we tightened it up. And we got our water lock on our jug. So I will take this and set it in a dark, cool place for about 3 months. I'll check it from time to time to make sure it's bubbling, making sure the yeast is doing its job. And 3 months' time, we should have some drinkable wine. We'll see. All right. Till next time, go out and explore these, doing these things in austere settings, using old-style techniques. It's a fun hobby. Even if you're not a prepper or you're not homesteading, you're not trying to be self-sufficient. It's a fun hobby. It's fun learning how to do this stuff the way they used to do it back then. Till next time, go live a life done free. Take care.
Thanks, Milo.